Extractive empathy is a description for what happens when compelling personal narratives drive donations, in particular on crowdfunding platforms. And while those donations are great, they often fail to address root issues. So, empathy, in our explicit definition, we say is the strategic use of emotionally compelling personal stories to elicit strong, empathetic responses from donors. It focuses on generating immediate financial support by prioritizing emotional impact over actual community needs. It involves repeatedly leveraging vivid and often distressing narratives to monetize empathy, reinforcing biases and resulting in temporary fixes rather than promoting sustainable long-term solutions. And you might be thinking, what's an example of that? It turns out that researchers in an article we link to in the newsletter from Cookson, Gallagher, and Mulder highlight this exact phenomenon on the platform GoFundMe. So this study that was released last year showed that higher income individuals raise, on average, 25% more funds on the platform because of the advantage provided by expansive social networks. In particular, they were looking at funds raised from wildfires. And this network advantage effect enables wealthier individuals to attract more donations. And that kind of makes sense, right? Because it kind of compounds what we know about wealth. Wealthier people, one, are probably more readily able to access and use and are aware of platforms like GoFundMe, but also have networks of people, are likely to have better networking opportunities, better support structures, that kind of thing. And I think we argue in coining this phrase, extractive empathy, that in the process of people donating, those peer-to-peer fundraising, the crowdfunding platforms themselves focus on individual stories and your ability to essentially market yourself to an audience in a way that's not necessarily sustainable for systematic change or long-term development or improvement over the long term. So we have some strategies that we think are useful to mitigate the impact of these effects. But George, what else do you want to add about extractive empathy?
I was just trying to rethink when I was looking at the next round of disasters that were happening with the various hurricanes hitting the South, about what I was seeing, and folks literally front running before hurricanes would even hit land, being like, gotta get my GoFundMe up there, as opposed to groups like AmeriCares, groups that are working on the ground in an organized way with the infrastructure that's there to deliver resources in a more equitable way, which actually matters quite a bit when you're talking about disaster recovery and rebuilding. And when I looked at it, I was like, how do I package this? What's going on? The concept of, extractive being what I'm taking from the natural resources of compassion in the moment of crisis was being channeled into donation-based crowdfunding for individuals as opposed to organizations. And I'm aware there are organizations out there, platforms like GoFundMe, that have also the ability to raise for nonprofits. However, when you go and search and look, what shows up at the top is what's trending. What shows up at the top is, and you can filter for this, almost done, 75% there. And that makes you feel like, oh, I'm going to help them get over that hurdle, get them to the edge. I want to get them to the end. People want to help once they know it's more likely to succeed. And so part of this is, don't be surprised that if I did this analysis of, hey, guess what? People with wealthy networks get more money. Take 2 seconds and go to The Knot, which is a leading wedding registry, theknot.com, right? Go to a wedding registry. That's what that is. Hey, can I have all of this expensive stuff, please, friends of mine? It just so happens all of my friends are high net worth individuals, and I get more money. Ta-da! But it's different. And it's different because, let's say it was not, instead of not, but hey, wealthy friends, get me started so that the community sees that this is gaining traction, that it's trending, that it's almost toward completion. And then show me up in the search for people that are, in the moment, compassion and crisis, motivated to give, show up. So I think it's a little bit more problematic than just saying, hey, you're not getting angry at wedding registries and wealthy people giving more to couples that have them in their friend network. It's different. And I just want to point this out because the New York Times did a huge story on it last year. And I think it's something worth looking at because I think it ties to a lot of other threads that are worth looking at.
No, George, I think that's exactly right. But George, I think if you were to critique this concept, one might say, hey, is it equitable? Maybe not. Is there inequities in how this fundraising is raised? Yeah, maybe there's inequities, but that's money that people weren't going to donate anyway. People donating on GoFundMe, maybe that's a different audience than the people who are going to the AmeriCares, the American Red Cross, etc. So what would you say to people who say, hey, this is additive, this is in addition to the traditional nonprofit infrastructure, and in some ways it's actually outside of it, right? And people have valid reasons to maybe be concerned about traditional philanthropy and how money gets allocated in that kind of way. And you're like, hey, this is a direct way. I know exactly where my money's going, even if there's inequities in the platform. Like, I'm making a direct difference. And I'm not the kind of person who's going to donate to the big multinational NGO. What would you say to that critique of this concept?
You can't doubt the perceived, I'm not using that word accidentally, the perceived transparency of giving to an individual, because it is very real. Here is their story. And by the way, they're being competitively placed against other people who have to sell their story to get these donations. There's nothing wrong with people asking for support from their community at all. There are, frankly, more platforms that would pop up tomorrow if it's, oh, here's the answer, shut them down. Not a thing. Cyberbagging literally grew up with the internet. We have seen it. It has evolved. And these are just sort of the current players in the game. And I hear that critique, but also when you look through in terms of some of the vetting that is going on, it's difficult to try to do that for all of these individuals. I'm not saying that, there's X% of fraud on any platform, but the perceived transparency is very real and something that nonprofits, large, small, need to be re-reminded of. I look at one of the pinnacles of this is Donors Choose, which is phenomenal for brokering this and saying, hey, here are the exact resources of the exact school. You can filter and find it. Like, it is a beautiful model, has always been. One of the things I point toward in not just sort of shaking my fist at the sky, which I am wont to do at times, but to be a bit more solutions oriented, is the concept of the overflow. I think if you hit your goal, huzzah. I needed $15,000 to help Sprinkles, my kitten, get a new tail. There's no world where Sprinkles needed $25,000. And in that world, I think you should have designated an overflow ASPCA local to your area or ASPCA national that gets the overflow money that Sprinkles' tails surgery didn't require. And I think that is a sort of responsible way to operate a donation-based crowdfunding platform and not just sort of say, hey, look, we have nonprofits too. You can choose to fundraise for them. Like, that's called you're just trying to compete in a peer-to-peer software fundraising game. That I think is pretty transparent to me, at least. But the overflow of saying, look, if you hit your goal, you set your goal, you hit it. Congratulations. And guess what? Now you're raising for this because you designated that charity. You hit your goal, it goes there. Asterisk, the problem is that your competitors will be like, hey, everything you raise here stays with you no matter what. And you're like, all right. But for large players, I think that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, George, that makes a lot of sense because my understanding is currently you can just keep raising your goal as the money flows in. Kind of
Sprinkles needs a new tail, man. New tail for Sprinkles. And it's unfair for me to just say GoFundMe. They happen to be the largest player with over 15 billion raised, 100 million donors active in 19 countries. But there are others like Fundly, UCaring, Give Forward. There's all of Facebook fundraisers. What about that, George? Caring Bridge, Help Hope Live. There are a number of these platforms that are, I think, in some flavor, leveraging extractive empathy.